February 14, 1933, 4:32 a.m. The Cotton Club basement, Harlem, New York. Bumpy Johnson stood alone in a room with 12 armed men, Dutch Schultz's best killers. Men who'd murdered 43 people between them. The door at the top of the stairs, locked from the outside. No windows, no exits. One hanging light bulb swinging slightly from a draft he couldn't feel. 90 minutes later, only one man walked out of that basement alive. And the message he delivered to Dutch Schultz that morning changed the power structure of Harlem forever. This is the untold story of the night. A 30-year-old black man facing impossible odds used pure intelligence to defeat an empire. No luck, no backup, just strategy so brilliant that even his enemies had no choice but to respect him. What happened in that basement stayed buried for 40 years. The police report was sealed. Witnesses were paid to forget. Dutch Schultz died 2 years later with the secret. But now we know the truth. And the truth is even more remarkable than the legend. To understand what happened that night, we need to go back to 1929. October 29th, Black Tuesday. The stock market crashed. Millionaires became beggars overnight. Banks collapsed. Factories closed. Unemployment hit 25%. White people who'd never been hungry were suddenly standing in bread lines. But in Harlem, black folks had been surviving impossible odds for 300 years. They knew how to make something out of nothing. And in the ashes of the Great Depression, Harlem became the most economically vibrant neighborhood in New York City. The secret was a game called the numbers. Here's how it worked. You'd pick a 3-digit number, any number between 0 and 999. You'd bet as little as a penny. Once a day, a winning number would be drawn based on the last 3 digits of the New York Stock Exchange trading totals. If your number hit, you'd win 600 to 1, 600 to 1. A penny became $6. A quarter became $150. To people making $8 a week, this wasn't gambling, this was hope. By 1933, Harlem's numbers racket was generating $5 million a year. $5 million. In the middle of the Depression. That's $75 million in today's money flowing through a 10-block radius. And one woman controlled it all. Madame Stephanie St. Clair, born in Martinique, came to Harlem in 1912 with nothing, worked as a seamstress, saved every penny. By 1923, she'd bought her first numbers operation. By 1930, she ran the entire thing. They called her the numbers queen. But those who knew her understood she was more than that. She was Harlem's bank. When black businesses needed loans that white banks wouldn't give them, Madame St. Clair funded them. When families got evicted, she paid their rent. When the police harassed her community, she hired the best lawyers in New York. She didn't just run the numbers. She built an empire on respect. And working as her chief enforcer was a man who'd arrived from Charleston, South Carolina, with a prison education and a philosophy that would change everything. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. Everyone called him Bumpy. He wasn't the biggest man, 5'9", 170 pounds, but the way he carried himself, people moved aside. He'd done 5 years in Charleston State Penitentiary for robbery, but prison hadn't hardened him. It had educated him. He read everything: philosophy, military strategy, psychology. He studied how emperors conquered nations, how generals won impossible battles, how one man with the right plan could defeat an army. When he got to Harlem in 1930, he didn't come to be a gangster. He came to be a strategist. Madame St. Clair saw it immediately. She didn't need more muscle. She had plenty of men who could shoot. She needed someone who could think. Someone who could turn a confrontation into a negotiation. Turn violence into victory. Within a year, Bumpy became her most valuable asset. Not because he killed more people, because he killed fewer people and still won. But 50 miles north in the Bronx, another empire was watching, and they wanted what Harlem had. Dutch Schultz, born Arthur Simon Flegenheimer, the Bronx, 1901. If Bumpy Johnson was intelligence personified, Dutch Schultz was ambition without limits. He'd built his empire on bootlegging. Prohibition had made alcohol illegal in 1920, and Dutch turned that into a fortune. By 1933, he controlled beer distribution in the Bronx, Manhattan, and parts of New Jersey. He was pulling in $20 million a year. 20 million. But here's the thing about men who build empires on violence. They're never satisfied. Because deep down, they know their empire is fragile. It depends on prohibition. And by 1933, everyone knew prohibition was ending. Roosevelt was about to repeal it. Dutch's golden goose was dying. He needed something more stable, something prohibition couldn't touch. That's when he looked south toward Harlem and saw $5 million a year that didn't depend on any law. January 12, 1933. Dutch sent 3 men to Madame St. Clair's brownstone on 140th Street. They didn't knock. They walked in like they owned it. The lead man, Joey No, Dutch's right hand, put an envelope on her desk. Inside was a contract. Dutch wanted 40% of the number's operation. In exchange, he'd provide protection. Protection. From what? From him. Madame St. Clair read the contract in silence. Then she looked up at Joey No and said 6 words that sealed everything that followed. "Tell Mr. Schultz he's mistaken." Joey blinked. Mistaken about what? This is Harlem, not the Bronx. Lady, you don't understand what you're, she cut him off. I understand perfectly. You may leave. Joey No walked back to the Bronx and told Dutch he'd been dismissed like a schoolboy. Dutch's face went red, then white. Then he did something nobody expected. He laughed. She thinks she's special, he said. Let's educate her. 3 days later, one of Madame St. Clair's collectors disappeared, found in the East River 2 days after that. Hands bound, gunshot to the head. A week later, 2 of her number's runners were beaten unconscious on 125th Street, in broad daylight. Nobody helped them, because standing 10 feet away were 3 white men in suits, smoking cigarettes, daring anyone to intervene. By February 1st, 1933, Dutch had sent a clear message: cooperate or be destroyed. That's when Madame St. Clair called Bumpy into her office. She didn't speak immediately. She stood at the window looking down at Harlem, her empire, her community, everything she'd built. "How would you handle this?" she finally asked. Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would define the rest of his life. Respect isn't negotiated, it's demonstrated. Meaning. Dutch thinks this is about money. It's not. It's about whether we bow. If we bow now, we'll bow forever. And if we don't bow, then we prove why we don't have to. Madame St. Clair turned to face him. He has 100 men, Bumpy. He does. We're outnumbered 5-1. We are. He's Dutch Schultz. He is, Bumpy leaned forward. But he's not Harlem. That night, Bumpy sent his own message. He walked into a Bronx speakeasy where Dutch's men collected protection money. Alone. No gun. Just walked in like he was ordering lunch. Dutch's collector, a man named Enzo Capraro who'd killed 7 people, stood up, hand moving toward his waistband. Bumpy raised both hands, palms out. Just here to talk. We don't talk to. Dutch sent 3 men to deliver a message to Madame St. Clair. I'm one man delivering a message to Dutch. Seems fair. Enzo's hand stayed on his gun. What message? Tell him Harlem appreciates the offer, but we decline. You decline? Enzo laughed. You're gonna decline Dutch Schultz. We just did. You know what happens to people who decline Dutch? Bumpy smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that makes you check if your gun is really where you think it is. I know exactly what happens. That's why I'm here, to make sure Dutch knows what happens to people who decline to decline. Enzo didn't understand, but he delivered the message. And Dutch Schultz, sitting in his office in the Bronx, finally understood something important. This wasn't going to be like the other times. This wasn't going to be threats and negotiations and eventual surrender. This was going to be war. But Dutch Schultz didn't fight wars. He ended them, quickly, brutally, permanently. February 10th, 1933, he called in his 12 best men. Let me tell you about these 12. Tommy the Executioner Sullivan. Born 1901, Hell's Kitchen. First kill at 16. By 1933, he'd murdered 16 men. Never missed a shot. Always close range. Always looked them in the eye. Dutch trusted him more than his own brother. Vincent Vento Barelli. Staten Island. 29 years old. Specialized in making people disappear. Not just killing them, making them vanish so completely their own mothers stopped looking. 11 confirmed missing persons traced back to him. 0 bodies ever found. Marty Delaney, the Bronx. He wasn't the most violent. He was the most loyal. Been with Dutch since 1925. Took 2 bullets for him in 1928. Still had one lodged near his spine. Doctors said removing it might paralyze him. Marty said he'd rather die loyal than live safe. And 9 others, each with their own body count, each with their own reputation. Dutch looked at these 12 men and said, I need you to deliver a message to Harlem. What's the message? Tommy asked. Dutch smiled. That messages have consequences. February 13th, 1933. 11 o'clock p.m. Tommy Sullivan sat in a Bronx diner, drinking black coffee, going over the plan. It was simple, elegant. The kind of plan that couldn't fail because it didn't depend on luck, it depended on math. They knew Bumpy Johnson walked alone at night, did his own collections, did his own rounds. Madame St. Clair had told him 100 times to take backup. He never did. Said it sent the wrong message. Pride, Tommy thought. Pride gets everyone eventually. The word had been spread through carefully paid informants. Tomorrow night, Bumpy would be making a collection at the Cotton Club. 2 o'clock a.m. He'd go through the basement entrance, count the money, leave through the same door. What Bumpy didn't know, couldn't know, was that the owner of the Cotton Club owed Dutch $60,000. And Dutch had made it very clear. Let us use your basement for one night and we'll call it even. The owner agreed so fast Dutch wondered if he'd asked for enough. The basement was perfect. 30 feet by 40 feet. Concrete floor. Brick walls. Crates of bootleg whiskey stacked against the east wall. 3 poker tables from illegal games nobody was supposed to know about. 1 entrance, narrow staircase, 14 steps, wooden door at the top. 1 way in, 1 way out. Tommy had studied the layout for 3 days. He'd timed how long it took to descend those stairs. 11 seconds. He'd measured the distance from the bottom step to the center of the room. 18 feet. He'd calculated sight lines, angles, positioning, and he'd placed his 11 men perfectly. 4 along the east wall, 4 along the west, 2 near the staircase. Himself at the far end, directly across from the door. 12 armed men. 12 different angles, no blind spots, no escape routes. The plan, let Bumpy descend the stairs. Let the door close behind him, lock it from outside. One of Dutch's men would be waiting up there with a key. Then 12 guns, 12 triggers. No conversation, no speeches, just bullets and the lesson Harlem needed to learn. February 14th, 1933. 3 o'clock a.m. The 12 men entered the Cotton Club through the back. The owner had cleared everyone out. The building was empty, silent, just how they wanted it. They descended into the basement one by one. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling, 40 watts, cast long shadows, made everyone look taller, meaner. Tommy liked that. Vento positioned himself behind a whiskey crate, good cover, clear sight line. Marty stood near the staircase where he could move first if needed. The other 9 found their positions, checked their weapons. Tommy watched them. Professionals, each one had done this before. Nobody was nervous. Nobody was careless. By 4 o'clock a.m. they were ready. By 4:15 a.m. they were waiting. By 4:30 a.m. they heard footsteps above them. Slow, measured. Not rushing, not sneaking, just walking. The door at the top of the stairs opened, and Bumpy Johnson began descending. 11 seconds, that's how long it takes to walk down 14 stairs. But Tommy Sullivan would later say, before he died in 1935, that those 11 seconds felt like 11 hours. Because something was wrong. Bumpy wasn't surprised. He should have been surprised. Any man walking into a room and seeing 12 armed men should show something: shock, fear, even anger. Bumpy showed nothing. He reached the bottom step, looked around the room slowly, made eye contact with Tommy, then with Vento, then with each of the 12. Then he smiled. Not a scared smile, not a nervous smile. The kind of smile you give when you've been waiting for something to happen and it finally has. "That all he sent," Bumpy said. Nobody spoke. 12, Bumpy continued. 12 men, for one guy who runs numbers in Harlem. He shook his head and his voice dropped lower, but somehow it filled the entire basement. "Dutch must be more scared than I thought." Tommy raised his gun. Cocked it, the sound echoed off the brick walls. "You got 5 seconds to beg," Tommy said. "I ain't never let a man beg, but Dutch said give you the chance, so I'm giving it." Bumpy looked at Tommy's gun, then back at Tommy's face. "I got a better idea," Bumpy said. "What's that?" "What if instead of me begging you, you walk back to Dutch and tell him I said hello?" Vento laughed. Genuine laughter. "This guy's got balls. I'll give him that." 5 seconds, Tommy repeated. 5, 4, 3, Bumpy moved, not toward the door, not backward, not down, up. He jumped, full vertical leap. His hand grabbed the hanging light bulb. And in one motion, one perfect, calculated motion, he ripped it from the socket. The glass shattered in his palm, and the basement went completely, absolutely, utterly black. Darkness, total darkness. The kind of darkness where you can't see your own hand in front of your face. The kind where your eyes try to adjust, keep trying, and never do because there's nothing. No light, no shadow, no contrast, nothing. For 3 seconds nobody moved, then chaos. "Where is he?" "Shoot." "Where?" "I can't." The first gunshot was deafening, enclosed space, concrete and brick. The sound didn't just echo, it multiplied. One shot sounded like 5. Then more shots. Muzzle flashes lighting the room for split seconds like a camera flash. In those brief moments of light, the men saw movement, something low, something fast. But by the time they aimed, the light was gone and they were shooting at memory. Tommy screamed, "Stop! Stop shooting, you're gonna hit each other." But fear doesn't listen to logic. And in total darkness, surrounded by gunfire with an enemy somewhere close, logic is the first thing that dies. Vento fired 3 times toward the center of the room. "I think I got him." He didn't. What he got was Angelo Russo, one of Dutch's men positioned on the opposite wall. The bullet hit Angelo in the chest. He dropped without a sound, but nobody knew, because nobody could see. Bumpy had moved the instant the light shattered. Not randomly, strategically. He'd spent 3 nights watching this basement. He'd memorized every crate, every table, every dimension. He knew this room in the dark better than these men knew it in the light. His first target, the man nearest the stairs, Marty Delaney. Bumpy's hand found Marty's throat before Marty even knew he was close. One strike fast, precise to the windpipe. Marty tried to scream. Nothing came out but a choking gasp. He collapsed trying to breathe, drowning in open air. The other men heard the gasp. "He's by the stairs." 4 guns turned that direction, fired. Bullets hit brick, hit wood, hit the man standing 3 feet to Marty's left, Paulie Gambino. 2 bullets, one in the shoulder, one in the stomach. Paulie went down screaming. "Cease fire, cease fire," Tommy was yelling, but panic is louder than orders. Bumpy had already moved. He used the gunfire as cover. Every muzzle flash told him exactly where someone was standing. And in the second after they fired, when they were blind from their own flash, when their ears were ringing, that's when he struck. Second target, Vento. Vento was crouched behind the whiskey crate, reloading. He didn't hear Bumpy approach. Didn't feel him until Bumpy's hand grabbed his hair and slammed his face into the concrete floor. Once. Twice. The third time, Vento stopped moving. A fourth man, Ray the Rat Mancuso, heard the impact, spun, fired blindly. His bullet caught Dominic Falcone in the leg. Dominic screamed, fell, fired his own gun reflexively. That bullet hit Frank Costello, no relation to the famous one in the arm. "He's everywhere," someone shouted. He wasn't everywhere. He was exactly where he needed to be, using their fear, using their numbers against them. In the darkness, 12 men weren't an advantage, they were a liability. Every shot they fired was a risk to each other. Every movement was a guess. But Bumpy knew. He knew where each man had been standing when the lights went out. He knew how people move in panic toward walls, toward corners, toward anything solid. He knew they'd shoot at sounds. So he made sounds. He kicked a whiskey bottle. It rolled across the floor. 3 guns fired at the sound. One of those bullets hit Jackie the Hammer Malone in the back. He threw a poker chip against the far wall. 4 more shots. One hit Michael Big Mike Tortorino in the leg. By now the basement smelled like gunpowder and blood and fear. The sound was a nightmare. Men screaming, men cursing, men crying. Some were begging for the lights. Some were begging to leave. Some were just begging. Tommy Sullivan, the most experienced, the most dangerous, stayed calm, or tried to. "Nobody move," he shouted. "Nobody move, just stay still. He can't get all of us if we don't move." Smart. If they'd listened, Bumpy would have had a problem, but fear doesn't follow orders. Ray the Rat ran, sprinted toward where he thought the stairs were. He was wrong. He hit the wall face first, broke his nose, collapsed. And in the sound of his collision, 2 men fired at him. 1 bullet missed. 1 didn't. Bumpy kept moving, kept calculating. 8 down, 4 left, including Tommy. He found the third man, Johnny Knuckles Rossetti, trying to reload in the darkness. Bumpy didn't give him the chance. 1 punch to the solar plexus. Johnny dropped his gun, gasping. Bumpy caught the gun before it hit the floor, used it to strike Johnny across the temple. Johnny crumpled. 3 left. Big Mike was on the ground, bleeding from his leg, trying to crawl toward the stairs. Bumpy stepped over him, kept moving. Big Mike wasn't a threat anymore. That left Tommy and 1 other, Sal, the Shadow Benedetto. Sal had pressed himself into a corner, gun raised, finger on the trigger, waiting for any sound, any movement, anything. Bumpy found him by his breathing, fast, panicked, amateur. Bumpy whispered, barely audible from 5 feet away. "Right here," Sal fired, 6 shots. All hit the wall where Bumpy had been, where Bumpy was 2 steps to the left. He moved during the muzzle flash while Sal was blind from his own gunfire. 1 strike to Sal's wrist. The gun fell. 1 strike to Sal's temple. Sal fell. 2 left. Tommy and Big Mike. Big Mike was wounded, bleeding, no weapon. Tommy was somewhere in the darkness and he hadn't fired a shot in 3 minutes. Because Tommy was smart. Tommy was listening. Tommy was waiting. The basement went silent except for the groaning of wounded men. Then Tommy's voice, calm and cold. "You're good, I'll give you that." Bumpy didn't respond. "But you're not walking out of here. That door's locked. Even if you kill me, it's locked." Silence. "So here's what's gonna happen. You and me, we settle this. You kill me, maybe you figure out the door, maybe you don't, but at least you tried. More silence. Or, Tommy's voice shifted slightly, betraying his position. You let me walk up those stairs, and I tell Dutch you're too valuable to kill. I tell him you beat 12 men in the dark, and Dutch respects that. You work for him, we all get rich. For a long moment nothing, then Bumpy spoke, first time since the light went out. Where you from, Tommy? The question caught Tommy off guard. What? Where you from? Hell's Kitchen. Why, you grow up poor. Everyone grows up poor in Hell's Kitchen. Then you know what it's like, fighting for respect, getting stepped on because you don't have power, watching people who look down on you decide your life. Tommy didn't respond. That's why you work for Dutch, right? Because he gave you power, gave you respect. Yeah. Then you understand why I can't work for him. Why? Because he's not offering me power. He's offering me chains. Tommy laughed, bitter. We're all in chains, friend. Question is whose? No, Bumpy said quietly. Question is whether you know you're in them. Then movement, fast. Tommy fired. 3 shots toward the voice, but Bumpy had moved during his own words. Used Tommy's focus on the conversation to close the distance. Bumpy's hand found Tommy's gun hand in the darkness. Twisted. The gun fell. Tommy threw a punch, connected with Bumpy's jaw. Hard. Bumpy tasted blood, but Bumpy didn't fall. He pivoted. Used Tommy's momentum against him. In close quarters combat, size doesn't matter. Leverage does. 1 strike to Tommy's knee, Tommy buckled. 1 strike to Tommy's elbow, Tommy's arm went numb. 1 strike to Tommy's throat, controlled, precise, not lethal, just incapacitating. Tommy collapsed, gasping for air just like Marty had. And then there was silence. Bumpy stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, cut on his jaw. Glass cuts on his palm from the light bulb. Bruises forming on his ribs, but standing. He walked to the staircase. Climbed 13 steps carefully in the darkness, counting each one. The 14th step. The door, he knocked. 3 times, calm. Measured. On the other side, Dutch's man, the one with the key, the one guarding the exit, pressed his ear to the door. Tommy, he called. That you? Bumpy didn't answer. Tommy, Bumpy knocked again. Same rhythm, 3 times. The man on the other side hesitated. Procedure said not to open the door until the signal. 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock. This was 3, wrong signal, but he heard moaning through the door, heard someone gasping. Who's hurt? He called. No answer. Protocol versus curiosity, training versus fear. He chose wrong. He unlocked the door, opened it 6 inches, peeked through. Bumpy's hand shot through the gap, grabbed the man's collar, pulled him forward into the door. The impact stunned him. Bumpy pulled him through down the stairs. The man tumbled, hit the basement floor, didn't get up. Bumpy stepped through the door, into the Cotton Club main floor. Empty, dark, silent. He walked through the club, past the bar, past the stage where Cab Calloway performed, past the tables where Harlem's elite drank bootleg champagne. He walked out the front door onto Lenox Avenue. 4:47 a.m. The sun wasn't up yet. The street was empty except for one man, a street cleaner named Samuel Moore, who would tell this story for the rest of his life. He watched Bumpy Johnson walk out of the Cotton Club, bleeding, limping slightly, but walking. Samuel said later, I knew something had happened, but he didn't look like a man who just survived something. He looked like a man who just proven something. Bumpy walked north, toward Madame St. Clair's brownstone. He had a message to deliver, but there was one more piece to the story. 5:15 a.m. inside the Cotton Club basement, someone was moving. Marty Delaney. He'd been the first one hit. Crushed windpipe. Couldn't breathe properly. Couldn't call for help. He'd spent the last hour on the floor listening to everything, unable to do anything. But he wasn't dead. He crawled, inch by inch, toward the stairs. 14 steps. Might as well have been 14 miles. It took him 20 minutes to reach the staircase. Another 15 to climb it. His throat was on fire. Every breath was agony. But Marty Delaney had taken 2 bullets for Dutch Schultz. Loyalty meant something to him. He had to warn Dutch. He emerged from the basement at 5:52 a.m., found the Cotton Club owner hiding in his office, drinking straight whiskey, praying to a god he hadn't spoken to in 30 years. "Call, Dutch," Marty gasped. The owner called. 6:10 a.m. Dutch Schultz's phone rang. He answered on the first ring. He'd been awake all night, waiting for confirmation that the Harlem problem was solved. "Boss." Marty's voice was barely recognizable. "Basement." What happened? Everyone, down, everyone, 12 men. Dutch's face went white, then red, then white again. "How many did you get?" None. "How many of you?" 12. "How many of him?" 1. Silence. Dutch hung up, sat in his office, stared at the wall. His advisor, a man named Abe Landau, was sitting across from him. "What happened?" "He killed 12 men. How many did he bring?" "None, just him." Abe blinked. That's not possible." Dutch stood up, walked to his window, looked south toward Harlem. "Do you know what will happen if this story gets out?" Dutch asked quietly. "What?" "Every 2-bit operator in New York will think they can challenge me. Because if one black man can walk into a room and beat 12 of my best, what's stopping them? So we hit back harder. No, Dutch's voice was ice. "We already hit hard. We hit with 12 men. And we missed. So what do?" Dutch was quiet for a long time. Then he said something nobody expected. "We walk away." "What? We walk away?" "Boss, if we walk away now, everyone will think. They'll think exactly what I want them to think." Dutch turned to face Abe. "They'll think I'm smart enough to know when a war costs more than it's worth." "But, Abe, listen to me. That $5 million in Harlem, it's not worth $50 million in war, because that's what this would cost. Men, money, attention. Heat from the cops, heat from the feds, and at the end, maybe we win, maybe, but everyone bleeds. So we let him disrespect. He didn't disrespect me, he impressed me." Dutch smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "You know what he did? He didn't kill 12 men, he made me respect him. That's harder." At 8:30 a.m., Dutch Schultz sent a message to Madame St. Clair. The message said, "We should talk." They met 3 days later, not in Harlem, not in the Bronx. Neutral Ground, a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan owned by a man who owed neither of them anything. Dutch arrived first. Madame St. Clair arrived exactly on time. She sat down across from him, said nothing, waited. Dutch spoke first. "I made a mistake." "Yes, you did. I underestimated Harlem." "You underestimated one man. Harlem is many." Dutch nodded slowly. "I'd like to propose a new arrangement." "I'm listening." "I leave Harlem alone. Completely. Numbers, clubs, everything, your territory, your business. In exchange for respect and information. If something happens in Harlem that I should know about, you tell me. If something happens in the Bronx that you should know about, I tell you. We don't compete, we cooperate." Madame St. Clair studied him. "Why?" "Because I just learned something important. There are 2 types of power. Power you take, and power you earn. I'm very good at taking. You're very good at earning. I think we can both learn from each other." She didn't smile, but she nodded. They shook hands. And for the next 2 years, until Dutch Schultz was murdered by the Commission in 1935, he never touched Harlem again. Meanwhile, the story spread. By February 15th, all of Harlem knew. By February 20th, all of New York knew. By March, even the Italian families were talking about it. Lucky Luciano, who would become the most powerful mob boss in America, called Bumpy in for a meeting. They met at a social club in Little Italy. Bumpy walked in alone, same as always. Lucky studied him. "I heard a story. I don't know if it's true." "What story?" "That you walked into a room with 12 armed men and walked out alive." "It's true." "How?" Bumpy smiled. "I turned off the lights." Lucky laughed, actually laughed. I like you, you're smart. You want to work together. Doing what? I'm building something, a commission, 5 families. We stop fighting each other, start making real money. I could use someone like you. Bumpy shook his head. I appreciate it, but I'm not looking to join anything. Why not? Because the minute I work for someone else, I'm not Bumpy Johnson anymore. I'm just another soldier. Lucky nodded slowly. I respect that, but if you ever change your mind, you'll be the first person I call. They shook hands. And Lucky Luciano, the man who would reshape organized crime in America, walked away thinking, that's the freest man I've ever met. For the next 35 years, Bumpy Johnson ran Harlem. Not with fear, not with violence, with respect. He never joined the Italian families, never became a made man, never bowed to anyone. In 1952, when the Genovese family tried to muscle into his territory, he reminded them what happened to the last people who tried that. In 1963, when Malcolm X was facing threats, Bumpy offered him protection. Malcolm refused. He didn't want to owe anyone, but he later said Bumpy was the only gangster he truly respected. In 1968, when Frank Lucas was starting his heroin operation, he came to Bumpy first, asked permission. Because that's what you did in Harlem. You asked Bumpy. Bumpy Johnson died on July 7, 1968. Heart attack. He was 62 years old. His funeral was attended by over 1,000 people. Gangsters and civilians, criminals and cops, everyone came. Because everyone respected him. Not because he killed 12 men in a basement, but because he understood something most people never learn. So what does this teach us? 3 principles. First, intelligence beats force. Bumpy didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he was smarter. He knew the room. He knew human psychology. He knew that in darkness, 12 men weren't an advantage. They were a liability. In business, in life, in any competition, the person who understands the terrain wins, not the person with the most resources, the person with the best strategy. Second, respect is earned through results. Dutch Schultz didn't respect Bumpy because Bumpy asked nicely. He respected him because Bumpy proved his worth. In a language Dutch understood, you can't negotiate respect. You can't buy it. You can't demand it. You demonstrate it. And once you do, even your enemies have to acknowledge it. Third, true power is the freedom to say no. Bumpy could have worked for Dutch, could have worked for Lucky Luciano, could have joined the commission, would have made more money, had more protection, been part of something bigger. He said no. Because he understood, the minute you work for someone else's empire, you give up your own. And freedom, true freedom, is worth more than all the money in the world. This story was buried for decades. Why? Because it didn't fit the narrative. A black man outsmarting white gangsters. A black man building an empire on intelligence, not violence. A black man who commanded respect from the most powerful criminals in America. That's not the story mainstream history wanted to tell, but it's the truth. And the truth is this: Bumpy Johnson was more than a gangster. He was a strategist, a philosopher, a man who understood that the ultimate power isn't controlling others, it's controlling yourself. His code governed Harlem for 35 years, and that code can govern your life today. Never fight a battle you don't have to. But when you do fight, fight to win. Respect the territory you're in. Learn the rules before you break them. Intelligence is the only weapon that never runs out of ammunition. And never, ever, let someone else define your worth. If this story moved you, if it taught you something, if it made you see power differently, subscribe. Because there are 100 more stories like this. Stories of black excellence buried in history. Stories of impossible victories. Stories that will change how you see the world. Next video, The time Frank Lucas smuggled heroin in coffins from Vietnam and built a $50 million empire, until one cop became obsessed with taking him down. Comment below. If you were Dutch Schultz, would you have walked away? Or would you have gone to war? Because that decision, knowing when to fight and when to respect, is the difference between power and destruction. Bumpy Johnson knew the difference. Do you?